Pain is probably the most compelling reason that people support decisions to orchestrate death in various ways. So it's worth pointing out that just as personal liberty arguments don't hold water when thinking about fetuses, arguments for pain avoidance are useless when thinking about some cases of euthanasia. This is especially true with what's known as non-voluntary euthanasia. These cases often involve a decision about removing life support from a patient in a persistent vegetative state. We tend to see these cases as the least morally questionable because if a patient isn't conscious, it can be hard to see how that life has any quality at all. But the thing is, a patient in such a state isn't feeling anything. So arguments based on mercy and pain avoidance aren't actually gonna work here, and neither will liberty arguments unless the patient's desires were made known before they lost consciousness. Of course, you can make arguments based on concern for the family or financial considerations, but actual patient-centered arguments can be tough to come by in these cases, which might actually shed some light on why we find them less objectionable. By the time a patient is in a state of irreversible unconsciousness, most of the arguments we might have about protecting her from unwanted pain, from a life she doesn't want, all sort of seem misplaced, because at this point, to many people, there really isn't any personhood left. And if you reach that conclusion, you might fall back on the argument that the best way to honor the dignity of the person who once existed is to stop keeping her body alive with machines. Now, those who take a hard stance on the sanctity of life will, or should for consistency's sake, say that yes, even the life of an individual in a persistent vegetative state is still a life and therefore valuable and should be promoted. But there are other cases of euthanasia to consider as well, those known as voluntary euthanasia. In these cases, a patient has willfully made a decision to die, but she might simply be unable to carry out the act herself, so she asks someone else to do it for her. Likewise, in assisted suicide, the decision still rests with the patient, but here the assistance comes in the form of something like a prescription from a doctor, but the patient is the one who ultimately ends her own life. Unlike with non-voluntary euthanasia, these cases might be defended using liberty arguments because they center on the patient's freedom to choose whether to live or die. So all of this leaves us with one question, and it's a bit of a big one. What makes life worth living?
I think euthanasia is good in some situations.
My opinion on euthanasia is that I feel like it should be done but with the right time. For example, if someone's suffering or they just really aren't happy with themselves with the way maybe their disease is, then I feel like it's okay for euthanasia to be done.
Euthanasia, I don't support it. It's not a good way to treat people, you know?
No.
I think passive is when you don't do anything and you just like kind of like the person like just pass, you know? And active euthanasia, you said? Yeah, it's when like you do more, like you give more medicine, I guess, overdose them, you know? Mm-hmm.
I think it should be legal, but it should be in a controlled environment.
No, I don't think it should be legal.
I think euthanasia should be legalized, but under certain circumstances, such as maybe signing contracts and like also alerting family members of the patient and their wants and needs. And I feel like I think passive would probably be a better form of euthanasia than active, just because it's a little less harsh. And yes, I do consider myself to be religious, but I feel like in the right moment, in the right time, based on my views, I feel like God would know if you were really uncomfortable and really unhappy with the way your life is. So if you decided to go down the route of passive euthanasia, then I feel like it's not that big of a sin.
No.
I would consider myself